Brilliance Audio presents The Secrets We Left Behind by Soraya M. Lane, performed by Elizabeth Nolden. Cate stood in the middle of the enormous room and turned, slowly surveying the narrow beds and the last remaining patients lying in them. She shivered, instinctively wrapping an arm around herself as rain started to tap an erratic beat on the roof overhead. There were barely a dozen soldiers in the room, and it was strange to see so few men. For months, they'd faced an endless stream of men passing through their clearance hospitals, so seeing their numbers dwindle was almost more unsettling than the constant injuries she'd had to deal with. Until now, she'd been so busy she hadn't had time to pause for breath, and that was how she'd liked it. At least then it stopped her from thinking about what might have happened to Charlie. Now the tremor of fear she'd mostly staved off was starting to take hold. She looked down at her hands, balling them to stop the tremble. They'd arrived at the beautiful chateau in the early hours of the morning, running on little sleep and even less food, and by the time they'd finished setting up, there hadn't been time to rest. They'd arrived in lorries full of surgeons, orderlies and nurses, as well as patients and supplies, and although it was vastly superior being in a house rather than a tent, or the old-school building in Calais, it wasn't helping her to settle. They were a clearance hospital, and they'd been told it would only be so long before they were inundated with men. Cate looked around again, surveying the room, so at odds with the canvas tents she was used to operating under. The walls were painted a soft duck-egg blue. Luxurious drapes were still hanging, pulled back with elegant gold, plaited ropes. It was the most beautiful room she'd ever set foot in. She turned, imagining it filled with immaculately dressed couples, perched on sofas as they sipped wine, waiting to rise and be called to dinner. Before the war. As more and more orderlies arrived to assist with the evacuation and filed into the room, she forced herself to continue with her rounds, forgetting the possible past of the beautiful chateau and checking on her last remaining patients instead. It was the calm before the storm, because she knew instinctively that ambulances would start to arrive in their droves sooner rather than later, perhaps before she was even able to take her break. Her shifts seemed to merge together now. There was never enough time or enough orderlies or nurses to deal with the influx of men. It was impossible for there to be so much gunfire nearby and not end up with countless casualties as a result, and so Cate started to hum, doing her best to block it all out, to stay focused on what she was there to do. The irregular popping of guns, blasts from bombs, and German aircraft sporadically flying and firing overhead had become a background noise that no longer startled her. But today, knowing the Nazis were likely coming as the British troops started to lose ground, she couldn't help but be frightened. They'd placed a large red cross made of fabric on the grass outside the chateau, and so far the Germans had respected it, as they'd avoided being bombed, but it hardly made their makeshift hospital invincible, and they all knew it. "How are you holding up?" Cate paused at the sound of Lily's voice. Her friend's flushed cheeks and red-rimmed eyes made Cate wonder if she looked the same, equal parts exhausted and terrified of what was to come next. She longed for a good night's sleep and a bath, anything to quell her nerves and create a sense of normalcy again. But she doubted that was going to happen, despite the elegant rooms upstairs almost begging to be filled. What she wouldn't give to tiptoe upstairs and fall into one of the beds, or draw herself even a few inches of hot water in the bath. "I honestly don't know," she replied, forgetting her fantasy as quickly as she'd thought it. "One minute I feel oddly calm, and the next I'm a nervous wreck. How about you?" "I just want to know what's happening," Lily said, her voice low. "Surely they'll start to evacuate us soon, if it's really that bad out there. One of the other girls thinks they'll just leave us behind, but I don't believe they'd ever do that to us." Cate started. Surely they won't leave us.